At 58, 11 days after she buried the husband whose long illness had swallowed everything they owned, Mabel Ostrander sat at a borrowed kitchen table with $71 to her name, a foreclosure warning she had not opened, and a single iron key to a building the county had already marked for the wrecking crew. The key was the only thing her husband's family had let her keep. It opened a condemned village lending library at the bottom of a dead-end track called Wren Lane. Shuttered and locked for 40 years, appraised at nothing, ivy grown clean over the door, and it was, the estate letter said plainly, hers now, and worth exactly $0. She had not asked for it. Nobody in Harlan's family had wanted it. The little stone reading room down at the lane's dead end had belonged to Harlan's estranged uncle, an old man named Elias Wren, whom Mabel had never once met, and when the lawyer read the will in a room full of relatives who would not look at her, the library was the single line item that made them all sit back in relief. Let the widow have the ruin. Let her sign the demolition papers and be done. There was a buyer waiting on the lane, they said, a good clean offer, and all she had to do was put her name to the release and walk away with the small mercy of a debt forgiven. Mabel put the key in her coat pocket and drove out to Hollis Bend to look at the thing before she signed it away. The lane was greener than she expected. It ran off the county road and narrowed to a track of packed dirt and last year's leaves, hedged on both sides by a wall of ivy and wild grape gone feral, and at the very end of it, where the light came down gold through the leaves at the close of the day, sat the library. It was smaller than a house. One room of gray fieldstone under a steep slate roof, a single arched window on the lane side, a plank door swallowed to the hinges in vine. Somebody had nailed a condemnation notice to the door years ago, and the paper had gone to lace. Above the door, cut into the stone lintel and half hidden by leaves, were 3 words worn soft by weather. She had to stand close and tip her head to read them. A place kept. You'd be the widow then. She turned. A man had come up the lane behind her, heavy-set, careful, a clipboard under his arm, and a lanyard around his neck that said he was from the county. He introduced himself as the clerk, a man named Garvey, and he had the tired friendliness of somebody who had done this particular errand many times. "I won't waste your afternoon," Garvey said. "The structure's condemned, the roof's a season from coming in, and there's a party very interested in the lane itself, not the building. You sign the release, the county writes off the back assessment, the building comes down, and you're free of it by the end of the month. Cleanest thing that could happen to you. Honestly, I've got the paper right here." "What's the party want with the lane?" Mabel said. Garvey shrugged, not unkindly. "Frontage, there's a developer's man been by twice. They'll clear the whole dead end and build. It's the lot they want. The library's just what's standing on it." He held out a pen. "You don't even have to go inside. Most folks don't. It's 40 years of dust and mouse in there, that's all. Break your heart for nothing." Mabel looked at the pen. Then she looked at the 3 worn words over the door, and at the ivy, and at the last of the gold light going out of the lane, and something in her that had been lying very flat for 11 days stood partway up. "I'll go inside first," she said. "If it's coming down, I'd like to have seen it once." Here is what Mabel Ostrander did not know. Standing in that green lane, with a pen held out to her, and what she would only understand at the very end of a long autumn. The old man she had never met had spent the last 40 years of his life writing something in a book behind that locked door. He had gone on writing in it long after the last reader in Hollis Bend stopped coming, and what he had written there, in a slow and patient hand, would one day draw a whole town up that dead-end lane after nightfall, and it would call Mabel, who had never had a family that kept her, by her own name. If you have ever been the one nobody thought to keep a place for, the one left off every list, then stay with me, because that is exactly the shape of this story, and I think some part of you already knows how it needs to end. Take a moment now to subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you are watching from tonight. Then let us go up the lane together and open that door. The key turned hard, and the swollen door gave inward 2 inches and stuck against 40 years of grit, and she put her shoulder to it, and it opened. The smell came first. Damp paper and cold stone and something under it that was almost sweet, the ghost of lamp oil and old leather and cedar. The last of the daylight fell through the one arched window in a long gray bar, and in that bar hung a slow galaxy of disturbed dust, and beyond it the room was exactly what Garvey had promised. Shelves to the ceiling on every wall, sagging, furred gray, the books on them chewed and swollen and ruined. A reading table in the center under a fall of plaster. A cold hearth. And on the table, dead and dark, a small brass reading lamp gone green with age. Mabel stood in the doorway and felt the disappointment settle over her like the dust, and it was almost a relief, because it made the thing simple. There was nothing here. It was a ruin, and the man was right, and she would sign his paper in the morning and let them take the lane. She had come to say goodbye to a building she had never known, and now she had. She meant to leave. But the light went while she stood there, all at once, as it does at the bottom of a wooded lane, and then it began to rain, hard and cold and sudden, drumming the slate roof and sheeting down the one window, and her truck was at the top of the track 100 yards off through mud, and she was 58 and tired to the bone, and she did not want to run through it in the black. So she stayed. She would wait out the rain. That was all she meant to do. She found a dry corner and sat, and after a while, because a person cannot sit long in the cold and dark without doing something with her hands, she got up and went to the reading table and picked up the dead brass lamp. It was heavier than it looked, and the reservoir sloshed. There was oil in it still. On the shelf beneath the table she found a tin of long matches gone soft, and 3 matches down she found one that would strike, and she trimmed the crust off the old wick with her thumbnail the best she could and touched the flame to it. It caught. It guttered and smoked, and then it steadied, and a small warm circle of amber light opened in the middle of that dead room, and Mabel Ostrander, who had sat 11 days in other people's kitchens with nothing of her own, sat down in the one chair that would hold her. In the light of a lamp a stranger had left, and for the first evening since the funeral she was not called. That is where she was when she saw the card. It had fallen from one of the ruined books, or been left as a marker in it. A stiff little rectangle of cardstock yellowed to the color of tea, and it lay on the floor at the edge of the lamplight where she had knocked it loose without noticing. She picked it up. It was a lending card. The old kind, ruled in faint lines, and along the lines somebody had written in a careful, old-fashioned hand a column of dates going back and back, 40 years and more of them, and beside each date a single letter, always the same, a capital letter W. She did not understand it. She set it on the table under the lamp, and she meant to think no more about it, but the shape of that patient column of dates would not leave her, and she found herself getting up again and going to the shelves and easing out one of the ruined books, and a card lay in that one, too. Tucked in a paper pocket glued inside the cover, dates and initials, a whole town's worth of borrowing in a hand she was coming to know. She opened another. Another. Every book that was not too ruined to open held a card, and every card was a small record of who had carried that book home into the dark and brought it back. And in the last one she opened before the rain eased, tucked deep behind the pocket where it did not belong, folded once, was a slip of paper in that same careful hand, and it said only this: "Not alone. A lantern. Keep the desk lit." Mabel read it 3 times. Then she looked at the reading desk under the fall of plaster, the one she had taken the lamp from, and she saw for the first time that it was not a table at all. It was a keeping desk. A heavy slant-topped clerk's desk with a lid, and the lid was shut, and a lock held it fast, and the little iron key on her ring, the one everyone had told her opened nothing worth opening, slid into it and turned. The rain had stopped. She did not notice. She lifted the lid. There were the ordinary things a desk holds, a dried inkwell, a bundle of pen nibs, a folded pair of spectacles. But the desk was shallower inside than out, a good hand's width shallower, and when she pressed the back panel it gave, and swung. And behind it was a space, and in the space, wrapped in oilcloth against the damp, was a book. It was a ledger. Leather-bound, thick as a family Bible, the corners worn round with handling, and when she brought it into the lamplight and opened it, the pages were full, front to back, of names. Now I have to stop and tell you something, because I promised you the truth of this story, and here is where the promise starts to come due. What Mabel found in that book was not money. There was not $1 hidden in that library. What Elias Wren had kept behind the desk was only names and dates, and the small plain sentences of what a town had read and returned across 40 years, and if you are the sort who has stayed for the treasure, I want you to stay anyway, because the thing that book was worth to Mabel Ostrander could not be spent, and by the end you will not want it spent. If you have made it this far up the lane with her, subscribe and stay close now, because what those names came to mean is the reason I have been waiting to tell you this at all. She could not read it all that night. She took the lamp and the card and the ledger home to the borrowed kitchen, and she sat up with it until the oil was gone. The ledger was the borrower's book of the Hollis Bend Village Library, and Elias Wren had kept it. That much was plain from the first page, where a younger, straighter version of the hand she knew had written the date the reading room opened, and the first name entered under it. After that the names came on in their hundreds, a whole village passing through 40 years of pages, and beside each name, in a second narrower column Wren had ruled himself, he had written not a number, not a fine, not a due date, but a line. A small line for each borrower. Mrs. Cobb, the line said, who reads at the sink so as not to waste the standing. The Denby boy, who takes the sea books and has never once seen the sea. And beside a name she did not know, in letters pressed a little harder, not alone. A lantern. Every one of them. He had not kept a record of what the town owed him. He had kept a record of what he had given, and he had refused, page after page, to call it a debt. Mabel had grown up without much of that. She was honest enough with herself, alone in the borrowed kitchen, to know why the old man's book had caught so in her chest. She had been a quiet child in a loud family, and then a quiet wife among people who were not hers, and she had spent 58 years being the person a room forgot was in it. She had learned the particular arithmetic of it young, to take the smaller chair, to fill her plate last, to speak only when a silence had gone on long enough that no one else would rush to fill it, and to expect that a door held open was being held for whoever came behind her. Nobody had ever once written her name down as the first one wanted anywhere. She had spent a lifetime near warmth without ever being asked to sit down inside it. She had loved Harlan, and Harlan had loved her in his closed and ailing way, but Harlan's people had never once made a place for her. And when the long illness came, she had nursed him through it alone, and buried him alone, and been handed, at the end of it, a ruin nobody wanted. She read Wren's ledger of a town that had been kept, name by name, by one man who asked for nothing, and she felt the particular ache of a person looking through a lit window at a warmth she had always stood outside of. She went back up the lane the next morning. She told herself it was to close it up properly before she signed. The release stayed folded in her coat, untouched. Instead, she cleaned. She could not help it, her hands needed the work. She carried out the ruined books that were past saving and stacked them to dry the few that were not. She swept 40 years of grit from the stone floor and washed the one arched window until the morning came through it clean, and she found, doing it, the small evidences of the man scattered everywhere a house holds the shape of whoever tended it. Pencil marks at a child's height on the doorframe where he had measured somebody growing. A low stool set close by the hearth, worn smooth, sized for a small reader. A second lamp, better than the first, wrapped and put away against the day the first one failed. He had built the room to be a place a person could be kept warm and unbothered and unhurried, and he had gone on keeping it ready long after the county condemned it and the last reader stopped coming. And Mabel, sweeping his floor, began without deciding to think of the demolition release in her coat as something she was no longer going to sign. That was the week the developer's man drove out to Wren Lane. His name was Prentice, and he wore a good coat, and he did not fully leave his car, only stood in the open door of it with one polished shoe on the dirt of the lane, and looked at the library as Garvey had looked at it, as a thing standing between him and a thing he wanted. Mrs. Ostrander. He had done his reading. He knew her name. I understand there's been some delay signing the release. I want you to know I sympathize. Grief is a hard time to make decisions. He smiled. But I'd be doing you a disservice if I didn't tell you plainly how this goes. The building is condemned. That's not my doing, it's the county's, and it stands whether you sign or not. Sooner or later, it comes down. The only question is whether you take a fair offer for the lot now, while it's on the table, or whether you spend the money you don't have fighting a thing you can't win, and lose the building anyway, and the money with it. It's not for sale, Mabel said. Everything on a condemned lot is for sale, Prentice said pleasantly, or it's rubble. Those are the two conditions. You get to choose which, but only for a little while. He looked past her at the arched window, at the lamp she had lit and set in it that morning out of some instinct she had not examined. There's nothing in there, you know. I had a fellow look at the appraisal. 40 years shut. No fixtures, no value. Whatever you think you found, it isn't worth the roof it's under. He got back in his car. Talked to Garvey. The offer's good through the month. After that, the county takes it for the tax, and you get nothing at all. He backed down the lane and was gone, and Mabel stood in the door of the library with the lamp burning behind her in the window, and understood that the thing she had found could be taken from her, as the town's names had once been shut behind a condemned door and forgotten. The ledger had made the library matter to her. Prentice had just made it something she could lose. She went to the one person she thought might know. There was an old woman in Hollis Bend, everyone said, who had lived on the lane her whole life, and Mabel found her in a small house halfway down it. A woman named Cora, past 80, with hands like knotted rope and a mind gone nowhere at all. Elias Wren, Cora said when Mabel told her why she had come, and the old woman's face moved through 40 years in a moment. You're the one they left the library to. Harlan's wife. She looked at Mabel a long time. He'd have liked that it went to you. Though he never met you, did he? His own family saw to that. I don't understand any of it, Mabel said. The books, the cards, the ledger. Why would a man keep a lending library going for a town that stopped coming? Cora made tea before she answered, slow, and Mabel let her, because she was learning that the people who hold the real answers give them in their own time. The library didn't stop because the town stopped, Cora said finally. It went the other way round. The county condemned the building 40 years back, over the roof, and there wasn't money to fix it, and there was a school library going in over in the county seat, and they said the little room on the lane was finished. Locked it up. Only Elias wouldn't have it locked. She wrapped her hands around her cup. He'd kept it 30 years by then. It was his life's whole work, that room. So he kept a key the county forgot he had, and he kept the lamp lit, and any child that still wanted a book knew to come up the lane after dark and knock, and he'd let them in and let them read, and write it in his book, and never say a word to a soul about a condemned building being open. She smiled, and it took years off her. Half this town learned its letters after dark in a building that officially didn't exist. My own 2 boys among them. He saved room for every one of us the world had shut its door on. That was Elias. That was the whole of Elias. And when the children grew up and left, Mabel said. They left, Cora agreed. They always do. And still he kept the lamp lit and the book open, waiting for the next one who had no other door in the world that would swing wide for them. There got to be fewer and fewer. Last 10 years, I don't think anybody came at all. But he kept it. Right to the end, he kept it ready. The old woman's eyes were wet and steady. "You want to know why a man keeps a room warm for people who've stopped coming. It's because keeping the place is the love. The coming's not the point. Somebody held one open for him once, when he had none, and he spent his whole life paying it forward to strangers, and he'd have told you plain, the lamp isn't lit so they'll come. It's lit so that if they ever do, the door's already open." Mabel drove back to the reading room after dark with those words sitting in her, and she let herself in and lit the lamp, and she read the ledger again by its light, clear to the back this time. The last 40 pages where the entries thinned to almost nothing, and the hand grew older and shakier, and the names came further apart. A child a year. Then a child every few years. Then years with no names at all, and only Wren's own small lines, kept the desk lit. No one tonight. That's all right. And she read it right down to the final entries of a man writing alone in a condemned room, and she believed, closing it, that her heart had already understood the whole of it. She was wrong. She had not reached the last pages yet. The ledger was thicker than the entries filled, and there were pages after the town's names ran out, and she had not turned to them. But that was for later. First there was the fight for the lane, and a ledger of names was no weapon for it. The county tax was $460, and Mabel had, by then, $68, $3 having gone to gasoline. Prentice's offer would clear the tax and put a little cash in her hand, and cost her only the library and the lane, and the last thing anyone had ever left in her keeping. Garvey came up twice more with the paper. The second time he did not even bring the pen out, only left the release on the reading desk beside the lamp, and said, gently, that the month was nearly gone, and that after it there would be no offer to take, only the tax, and the tax would take the lot regardless, and then the building would come down, and she would have gotten nothing for standing between them and the lot but heartache. "I know how it sounds," Garvey said at the door, and he was not unkind. He was only a man who had watched 100 people lose the fight and wanted to spare her the 101st. "But you can't heat a building with a dead man's diary, Mrs. Ostrander. You've got no money and no roof and a debt you can't pay, and the sentiment won't keep the rain out. I'd hate to see you lose the house you're borrowing and this both, and end with nothing at all in your hand." When he had gone, Mabel sat a long time in the lamplight with the release in front of her, and she read the 3 words over the door in her mind, "A place kept." And she thought about a town of children who had learned to read past dark in a room that did not officially exist, and she thought that she had been, her whole quiet life, a person for whom no place had ever been kept, and that she was holding in her 2 hands the last standing proof that saving the forgotten a warm seat was a thing a human being could do, and she found she would rather lose everything else than be the one who finally signed it away. So she left the paper unsigned. She did the other thing. She started, though she had no money and no plan and no earthly reason to believe it would work, to open the library. She could not fix the roof. But she could clean and dry and set right the one dry corner under the sound part of the slate, and she could carry in the folding chairs from the church basement 2 towns over that a kind sexton let her have for nothing. And she could shelve the books that had survived, and she could put a hand-lettered card at the top of the lane. It said only, "The reading room is open again." After dark. Everyone, it was the only advertisement she could think of that was true. The first night nobody came, and she sat in the lamplight alone and told herself that the coming was not the point. The second night a young woman came up the lane with a child on her hip. She stopped in the doorway and would not look at Mabel. "I saw your card," she said, fast and defensive, ready to be turned out. It said everyone. "I've got a boy who won't settle, and I got nowhere warm to take him that don't cost and don't ask questions. If that's not what the card meant, say so and I'll go." "What's your name?" Mabel said. "Neely. He's Tobias." She shifted the child on her hip. "We're over the feed store. The feed store doesn't exactly know it, so if you're going to make a thing of it, I'm not going to make a thing of anything," Mabel said, and she stepped back and opened the door wider. Come in out of the dark. The lamp's lit. Sit anywhere you like, and the boy can sleep on the low stool by the hearth. It's the right size for him. A man built it that size, on purpose, a long time ago. Neely sat, wary as a barn cat, and the boy Tobias slept at last on the smooth-worn stool at the hearthside that Elias Wren had shaped to fit exactly such a child, and Mabel found a book that was not too ruined, a book of sea stories, and read it low into the room until the woman's shoulders came down from around her ears. And before Neely left, near midnight, Mabel did the thing she had watched a dead man do all through a ledger. She took down the borrower's book, and she opened it to the first blank page after 40 years of names, and she wrote, in her own hand, the first new entry the library had held in a decade. Neely and Tobias. Come in out of the dark. She turned it so the young woman could see it. You're writing us down, Neely said. I'm keeping you a place, Mabel said. That's what this book is. That's the whole of what it is. Neely came back the next night, and she brought another young mother, and that one brought her own, and by the end of the second week there were 8 or 9 people up the lane after dark, on the nights Mabel lit the lamp, the sort of people a town keeps at its edges. The ones no other lit window in Hollis Bend was open to, and Mabel wrote every one of them in the book, and read to whoever wanted reading, and let the ones who wanted quiet have the quiet. And the condemned library at the dead end of the lane was, for the first time in 40 years, exactly what Elias Wren had built it to be. It did not pay the tax. Cora was right, and Garvey was right, and even Prentice in his cold way was right. You cannot heat a building with a diary, and love does not clear a county assessment. The month ran out. Prentice's offer came off the table. The tax came due, and Mabel could not pay it, and the county sent the letter that said the lot would be taken, and Prentice, who had wanted only the lane. Let it be known that when the county sold the lot for the back tax he would be the one buying, and cheaper now than he had offered, and the building would come down before the first snow. And it was in the last week before the county came, sitting up alone in the lamplight, with nothing left to try and the demolition close enough now to feel like weather, that Mabel finally turned to the pages at the back of the ledger she had never reached. The pages after the town's names ran out. She had thought them empty. They were not. There was one more borrower in the book. Only one, on the last written pages, entered year after year in a private column of his own. A borrower who had a name but never a return date, because the book set beside that name had never been lent out at all. They had been chosen, and inscribed, and set aside, and kept. And the name, written first in a strong hand 40 years ago, and last in a hand grown old and shaking. The name Elias Wren had entered every single year for 4 decades and never once crossed off, was Mabel. Her own name. Mabel, written before she was ever a Ostrander, before she was ever Harlan's wife. Written when she was a girl she could barely remember being, in a town she had never lived in, by a man she had never met. She sat with the book open under the lamp, and could not, for a long moment, make the world hold still around it. Then, tucked inside the rear cover of the ledger, behind the last page, she found the letter. It was addressed on the outside, in the careful hand she had spent a whole autumn learning, to Mabel. Not to a stranger, not to whoever came. To her, by name, and it had been waiting behind a locked desk in a condemned room for a girl to grow up and find her way at last to the door. I do not want to keep you from it, so I will only tell you the shape of what it said, and let you hear the rest in her silence. Elias Wren had known her mother. Long ago, before Mabel was born, in the years Cora had spoken of, when Elias himself had been a young man with no family and no door anywhere that would open to him, it was Mabel's mother who had once kept him a place. A girl who had shared a lending room's warmth with a boy the world had shut out, and thought nothing of it, and moved away, and married, and had a daughter, and died young. And on her deathbed, the letter said, She had asked one thing of the only person she still trusted to remember her, the old friend from the reading room, now grown old himself and keeping a library of his own for the forgotten. She had asked Elias Wren to keep her daughter a place among the readers, to hold Mabel a spot in the warm in case the child ever found her way to a door that would open, because the girl's own family, she feared, would never make her one. So he had. For 40 years a man Mabel never met had entered her name in the borrower's book each year. On her birthday, the birthdays her own family had let pass unmarked, the ones nobody wrote down, and each year he had chosen a book for her and inscribed it and set it aside on a private shelf against the day she came. He could not find her. Harlan's family had seen to that, had kept the widow away from the strange old uncle, just as they kept her away from everything. But he could keep her a place. He could hold the door. He could make sure that if the girl her mother worried over ever came up a dead-end lane one night with nowhere else to go, there would be a warm room already lit, and a book already chosen, and a name already written down, so that she would know, from the first minute, that she had been expected, that someone had counted her in, that there had been all her overlooked life, one lit window in the world that was open to her, and one book with her name in it, waiting. He had died before she came. But he had kept the place. He had kept it ready to the very last shaking entry. No one tonight. That's all right. The door's open, lit for the girl. And he had trusted, as he had trusted a whole town of strangers before her, that keeping the place was itself the love, and that the coming was never the point of it. Mabel Ostrander, 58 years old, who had gone her whole life believing that no one had ever kept her a place at any table in any lit room anywhere, sat in a condemned library at the foot of that green lane and found her own name written 40 times in a dead stranger's hand. And she put her face down against the open book, and she wept as a person weeps who has been counted at last. And no one was there to see it, and no one to name it, and she needed neither. She was still holding the letter when she understood, all at once, what the town's names in the front of the book had really been. They were not a record of a library. They were her family. Every forgotten child Elias Wren had ever held a spot for. Every reader written down as a lantern and never alone, all of them, the whole book of the overlooked, and the shut out, and the after dark. They were the family she had never had, and had been entered into without knowing, decades ago, by a man keeping his word to her dying mother. She had not inherited a ruin. She had inherited a place among the readers. She had been kin the whole time, and never told. The letter said one thing more, at the end, and it was the only instruction it gave. On the private shelf behind the desk, wrapped like the ledger against the damp, she found the books he had chosen for her across 40 years, each one inscribed to her by name, a birthday of a girl her family forgot marked in every one. And among them, set apart, was a single volume he had wrapped and sealed and marked in his old hand. For the day you have a reader of your own. Mabel understood that one was not meant to be opened yet, and she left it sealed. She set it on the shelf where he had kept it, and she kept it in her turn, because she had learned from him that some places you keep are kept for a calmer still on the way. She went to Cora, at first light, the ledger under her arm, and the words would not come while she stood. So the old woman sat her down and made tea and waited. "He wrote my name in it," Mabel said finally. "Every year, 40 years, on my birthday. A man I never met." She opened the book to the last pages and turned it around. "I don't understand it, Cora. Why me? He didn't even know me." Cora put her spectacles on and read a long time, and her old face worked. "Your mother," she said at last. Very quiet. "That's it. That's the piece I couldn't give you." She looked up. "There was a girl on this lane, before your time when Elias was young and had nobody. A kind girl. She kept him company in the reading room when the rest of the town wouldn't have him. Then she married away, and we heard she'd had a daughter, and we heard she died young." Cora's hand came down flat on the page. "She'd have been your mother, child, and it looks like she asked him, at the end, to keep her girl a place. And he did. 40 years he did. For a woman he loved once, and a daughter he was never let near. They kept me from him, Mobile said. Harlan's people. All this time. They kept you from a lot of things, Cora said. But they couldn't reach into this book. Your name was safe in here the whole while, and you never knew it, and now you do. She closed the ledger gently and put it back in Mabel's hands. You want to know why there's your why. You were somebody's last wish, and he never once forgot it. Mabel sat with that in the small kitchen and could not speak, and Cora did not make her. She could not sign the release, and she could not pay the tax either, and the county was coming, and one letter in a dead man's hand does not stop a wrecking crew. So she did the only thing left to a woman with a book full of names. She went to Cora, and she brought the ledger, and she opened it on the old woman's kitchen table to the pages of the town. Read me a name, Cora, Mabel said. Any name you know. Cora put on her spectacles. Her knotted finger came down the column and stopped. Ledford, she said, and her voice caught. The Ledford girl. She had a stammer so bad the school gave up on her. Elias let her read out loud to the empty room every night for 3 years till she found her tongue. Look, he's written it. Ledford reads to the dark and is not afraid of it any more. She looked up. She's a school teacher now, over in the county seat. 40 years, and I'd forgotten she ever couldn't talk. Then telephone her, Mabel said. Telephone all of them. Every name in here you can still find. Tell them the room is coming down tomorrow, and that the man who kept it wrote each of their names down as a light he was glad to give, and that his book is open on Wren Lane tonight if they want to see it before the wall comes in. Cora looked at her a long moment, and then she reached for the telephone on the wall. They came the night before the county was to take the lot. Mabel lit the lamp at dusk out of habit, expecting Neely and Tobias and the usual few. Instead, the lane filled. Trucks and old cars nosed up the dead end and could not fit, and backed out to park along the county road, and people walked in through the ivy in the dark, dozens of them, far more than the little room could hold. And they stood out under the arched window where the lamplight fell into the lane, and one after another they came to the door and said their piece. He kept a place for me here when I was a boy and had none, said a man near 70, turning his cap in his hands. My father drank. This was the only warm door in Hollis Bend that never once asked me why I'd come. I'm in the book, a woman said, pressing forward. My mother's in the book. Show me. I want to see her hand. Mabel turned the ledger to her, and the woman found the name and put her fingers flat on it and could not speak. He wrote me down as a lantern, said an old woman near the back, holding the arm of a grown daughter. I came up this lane at 9 years old because my house had no light after my father passed, and he never once let on the building was shut. He'd say, the room's open, come read. Look at my name. He put me there like I was somebody worth the oil. Where is he? A younger man asked, looking past Mabel into the lit room. Where's old Wren? I owe him. I've owed him 30 years. Somebody get him out here. He's gone, Mabel said. He died before I ever met him. He left the lamp lit anyway. That quieted them, and into the quiet came Cora on her cane, with her 2 grown sons on either side of her, and the taller of the 2, a broad man in a work coat, stepped up onto the stone step so the lane could hear him. My brother and I learned our letters in this room after they nailed it shut, he said. The county says this building doesn't exist. Every soul standing in this lane knows different. Now, the back tax is $460, and the roof wants maybe $1,000 more, and there's a hat going round starting right now, and nobody goes home till it's full. He held up his own cap, already heavy with folded bills. You put in what he'd have lent you, and not a cent less. The hat went hand to hand in the lamplight, and the ledger went with it, so that people found their own names and their parents' names and wept over a debt that had never been a debt, and by full dark the whole tax was made 3 times over and the roof money besides. The county man was Garvey, and he came up the lane in the morning with the demolition papers under his arm and stopped his car at the sight of it. The lane was still full. People had slept in their trucks. Cora's son stood in the door of the condemned building with a coffee can of money and a signed subscription list, and Garvey got out slow and took off his hat, because a clerk knows a lost cause when a whole township is standing in it. "The tax is paid, Mr. Garvey," Mabel said. "In cash, this morning, in full, by the people this building belongs to. And there's more behind it than the tax." Garvey looked at the coffee can, and at the ledger open on the reading desk, and at the faces in the lane. And he was a tired man who had watched 100 people lose this fight, and he set the demolition papers down on the hood of his own car. "I'll be honest with you, Mrs. Ostrander," he said. "I don't have any earthly idea how you uncondemn a building, but I expect the county can find a way with this many people watching it try." He put his hat back on. "Tell me who to give the receipt to." Prentice's cheap offer died on the courthouse steps that week for want of a lot to buy, and he drove his good car off to want some other lane, and nobody in Hollis Bend gloated, and nobody was ruined, and after a while nobody thought of him at all. The roof was mended before the first snow. The reading room at the end of Wren Lane opened for good after dark and by day both everyone, and Mabel Ostrander kept it. She lost the borrowed house that winter, as Garvey had feared she would, because $61,000 is $61,000, and a village library does not pay a mortgage. But Neely and the boy Tobias had moved into 2 small dry rooms the town built onto the back of the library that autumn, and there was a 3rd small room, and Mabel took it. And she woke every morning to the smell of lamp oil and old leather, and the sound of a child learning to read out loud in the next room. And not once, on the hardest night, did she wish the house back. She kept the ledger in her own hand now, the front full of the old town and the back full of the new, Neely and Tobias. And the ones who came after them, the after-dark people, the shut-out, the uncounted, every one entered as a lantern and never a debt, exactly as Elias had done before her. Cora lived to see the first full winter of the reopened room, and read her own 2 boys' childhood names to Tobias off the yellowed pages, and died that spring, and Mabel wrote her name in the book one last time, as you write down someone whose place is kept on the far side of a door. And the one sealed book, the one Elias Wren had wrapped and marked for the day you have a reader of your own, Mabel kept on the private shelf and did not open, because she had understood him. She was keeping it for a comer still on the way. Perhaps for Tobias, when the boy was grown and had a child of his own to read to. Perhaps for someone neither of them had met yet, walking up a dark lane years from now with nowhere else the door would open, who would find a warm room already lit, and a name already written down, and a place already kept. That was the whole of it. That was what the old man had known and spent 40 years proving, and what Mabel Ostrander learned the autumn she was 58 and widowed and down to $71 and a key to a ruin. That the most valuable thing a person can leave is a place kept for someone who was never told they had one, and that no one who has been counted, even once, even late, even by a stranger, is ever truly worthless or truly alone. So I will leave you where Mabel sat that first winter, with the lamp in the window and the ledger open on her knee, and her own name written 40 times in a dead man's careful hand. And I will ask you the question she answered with the rest of her life, and you can sit with it as long as you need. If everything you had left in the world was $71, and a building everyone told you to tear down, would you take the safe arithmetic and sign it away clean? Or would you light the lamp and open the door and keep a place for whoever comes up the dark lane after you, as one was kept, all along, for you? If a story like this one meant something to you tonight, take a moment to subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you are watching from, so we can hold a seat for you here too.